Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are analyzing a case that it really forces us to redefine what we even mean by betrayal.
It really does.
This isn't just about a marriage ending in tragedy. It's about the chilling efficiency of, well, weaponized expertise, where a man who seemed completely responsible engineered this sophisticated campaign of digital terror against his own wife.
Right. Before murdering her.
Before murdering her. We are focusing on the Broomfield, Colorado deception.
It's a harrowing portrait.
Right.
And it's not a crime of passion, not in the slightest. This is cold, calculated control.
Yeah.
So when Kristil Krug, a 43-year-old biochemical engineer and mother of 3, was found dead in December 2023, the scene, it initially pointed investigators toward this really complex external threat.
A ghost from the past.
Exactly, an obsessed ex-boyfriend. And that was the exact narrative the killer desperately wanted everyone to believe.
But that narrative, that whole idea of a lurking stranger haunting a quiet suburban home, it was completely manufactured. The spectral figure didn't exist. The perpetrator wasn't some outsider. It was the man Kristil trusted, her husband, Daniel Krug.
A man who spent 6 weeks meticulously, and I mean meticulously, constructing a false reality just to camouflage what he was really planning.
So our mission today for this deep dive is to really look at how intimate partner violence, or IPV, has evolved in the digital age.
And we're pulling from, court records, very detailed police affidavits, and digital forensic testimony. The focus is really on 2 key concepts. First, how Krug built what we can only call a digitally engineered alibi.
And second, this profound use of technology for what's known as coercive control.
Right. That idea of coercive control through a panopticon effect is absolutely central to understanding Kristil's final months.
We have to go beyond just the murder itself and look at the psychological siege she was under. Can you imagine that feeling of being perpetually watched by someone who seems to know everything?
And not knowing who it is. What we're really studying here is this complete inversion of trust. A man whose professional skills were meant to protect data and, vulnerable populations were systematically turned inward, weaponized against his own family.
That inversion is the ultimate tragedy here. Daniel Krug wasn't just some random guy. He was a high-ranking state official, a man who took oaths to the public good.
And we're going to trace the digital DNA that forensic specialists use to dismantle his entire elaborate facade. It proves that even when physical evidence gets cleaned up, the digital record, it's an indelible witness.
Okay, let's unpack this. To really grasp the magnitude of this betrayal, I think we have to start with Kristil Krug herself.
We have to. The source material really emphasizes her complexity. She was defined by this rigorous intellect. Her career as a biochemical engineer, that's a field that demands intense analytical capability.
Oh, absolutely. Problem-solving, attention to the smallest detail.
She wasn't someone who would be easily duped or, prone to panic. Her whole professional life was built on empirical evidence.
But what I find so interesting, and the sources kept highlighting this, was her equally strong passion for modern dance.
Yes.
So she had this dual identity. On one hand, the precise, methodical scientist, and on the other, this incredibly expressive artist. It just suggests such an emotional depth.
And that complexity is crucial. It's so crucial because it informed how she responded to the terror campaign she was about to face. Her obituary movingly noted that the world will miss what she had yet to give us.
That's heartbreaking. It acknowledges that she was this whole person balancing the empirical and the emotional, and all of that was cut short.
But beneath that surface of suburban normalcy, the house on Promontory Loop, the Krug household was deeply fractured.
Yeah. By the fall of 2023, the sources are clear the marriage was collapsing, and Kristil was ready to do something about it.
And she was methodical, even in her exit strategy. She had told family members that the marriage was all but over. This wasn't just a vague threat.
No, she was actively preparing to file for divorce. And really significantly, she was seeking full custody of their 3 children. She wasn't just fleeing, she was planning an orderly withdrawal.
And that transition, that planned filing for divorce and custody, experts identify that as the single highest risk factor for domestic homicide.
When the victim tries to leave, to initiate that separation, the abuser faces the absolute loss of control.
Precisely. For a controlling personality like Daniel Krug, Kristil's calculated move was an existential threat. A threat to his dominance over her and over the children, who he probably saw as extensions of his own power.
So that threat of abandonment, it transforms the need for psychological control into a need for, permanent elimination.
And we also know that her decision to go for full custody was rooted in specific concerns. She had described him as being sometimes rough with the kids,
So this wasn't just about the marriage not working anymore, it was about protection.
which elevated the risk for Daniel exponentially because her claims could threaten his reputation, his freedom, everything. So as he started his campaign of manufactured terror, the fake stalker, Kristil, responded not with panic.
But with the systematic rigor of an engineer.
Exactly, like she was tracking a system failure.
Can you elaborate on the logs she kept?
Mhm.
The sources say they were just incredibly detailed, almost like forensic data entry.
They were meticulous. Kristil kept detailed logs of every single threatening text, every suspicious email. She noted the exact time, the specific content, the origin accounts.
She was trying to find a pattern.
She was. She even tried to note correlations, like if a message showed up right after she mentioned a personal event to Daniel. She was treating the threat like a scientific problem that needed empirical data to solve.
And she installed surveillance cameras around the home, right?
Sure.
Trying to get physical proof of this phantom lurker.
She did, and it's just devastatingly ironic that these defensive measures born from her analytical mind were completely useless.
Worse than useless.
They were co-opted. The one person with administrative access, the insider, was systematically circumventing the very systems she was relying on.
Daniel.
Daniel knew where the cameras were, how the network was set up. He had the codes to manipulate them or even disable them.
So her attempts at self-preservation were actually just giving him a map of her vulnerability.
He was turning her strengths against her. She was living in a state of acute siege, believing this omniscient stranger knew things like her dentist appointments or that her car registration was expired.
The profound tragedy is that the source of that omniscience, that terror, was the intimacy of her own marriage. The person who knew those small, mundane details was the person she slept next to every night. Here's where it gets really interesting, because we have to somehow reconcile Daniel Krug the killer with Daniel Krug the professional.
Duality is stunning.
This was not a man hiding in the shadows. He actively cultivated this image of responsibility, of public trust. How did a guy with that kind of high-level access and authority pull this off?
The duality is the core of the deception. Daniel Krug, 44 years old, presented himself as a family steward. As a wealth manager and investment advisor representative, his entire business model was built on trust and guidance.
He literally marketed his philosophy as being a teacher and coach, promising to protect his clients' futures.
But his professional roles went even deeper. He had a high-level position within the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, CDPHE. He was the division director for operations and administration.
And this is where that inversion of trust you mentioned becomes so tangible.
It is. As division director, he was overseeing operational compliance for these complex state-mandated programs. Things like home and community-based services, HCBS.
Which supports vulnerable populations, right? Elderly, disabled individuals.
Exactly. Making sure they get care in safe settings. He was literally a gatekeeper of safety and compliance for the state's most vulnerable people.
So he was responsible for systems integrity, data security on a massive scale. The sources mention his work with complex state data systems, BUS and CBMS. Let's not just gloss over those. For someone listening, what do those administrative duties tell us about his skill set?
That is an excellent question because it defines his criminal capacity. BUS and CBMS, that's the Billing and Utilization System, and the Colorado Benefits Management System. These are massive, multifaceted databases. They track eligibility, services, state funds.
So, in simple terms, he knew how to manage vast, protected digital infrastructures.
Precisely. He understood the architecture of security, access points, administrative overrides, how information flows through protected networks. His whole career was built on managing systems and minimizing security risks.
He didn't just understand digital systems, he managed the people who managed them.
Right. And he took that elite-level understanding and systematically created vulnerability in his wife's life. He used his knowledge of network security, of probably IP spoofing and digital compartmentalization to manipulate their home security and create the digital ghost of Anthony Holland.
So the betrayal is systemic. He was entrusted with protecting state data and vulnerable citizens, but he deployed those exact skills privately to violate laws, impersonate someone, and terrorize his wife.
And the prosecution argued this was all driven by a deep-seated desire to be a puppet master. This wasn't simple rage. This was control through engineering.
What does that look like psychologically, that Machiavellian desire to be the puppet master?
It indicates a personality with a high degree of manipulation and deceit. A strategic long-game approach, not impulsive violence. By inventing the stalker, Krug was trying to force a codependency. He wanted to create a false reunion dynamic,
So he would sit there, comforting Kristil.
while reading her the terrifying messages he himself had just written, offering comfort and advice against the enemy he invented. That is textbook gaslighting, making the victim doubt her own reality and forcing her to rely on the source of her distress.
That level of compartmentalization, to comfort someone over the terror you are actively inflicting, it speaks to a profound lack of empathy.
Absolutely. He was regulating her entire emotional state through fear. He was succeeding at coercive control. But when the hero narrative failed to stop the divorce, and Kristil's analytical mind was providing so much data that police scrutiny on the fake stalker was increasing.
He started to realize the stalking campaign itself could lead back to him.
Yes, the motivation shifted violently. It went from psychological manipulation to self-preservation and vengeance. The realization that he might face felony charges for stalking Kristil seems to be the primary catalyst that pushed him toward homicide.
He had to eliminate her.
To permanently silence the evidence of his own digital crime, the puppet master had to cut the strings, and the only way to ensure total silence was elimination.
Let's turn to the mechanics of that digital campaign. It ran for about 6 weeks, right up until the murder. The chosen persona, Anthony Holland, seems so specific.
Oh, it was strategically brilliant from a perpetrator's point of view. Holland was an ex-boyfriend Kristil hadn't seen in over 20 years.
Okay, so what does that accomplish for him?
Several things. First, it complicates immediate police verification. It's much harder to track someone that far back. Second, he's tapping into that primal, almost movie villain fear of the obsessed, unresolved former lover.
Right.
And third, Holland lived out of state in Utah, so that creates a convenient geographical scapegoat.
And the harassment? It started pretty subtly, but then it escalated quickly. The sources note he was using burner devices, anonymized accounts, starting in late October 2023.
The very first contact was an aggressive text basically asking Kristil to hook up. When she didn't respond because she was committed to ending the marriage cleanly, the tone immediately shifted. The messages became angry, obscene, accusatory.
That failure to get control back triggered the shift to outright terror.
It did, and Daniel had to be very careful to deflect suspicion from himself. And this is where the psychological masterstroke came in.
The messages referred to Daniel Krug as a loser husband.
That was a critical piece of misdirection. If the stalker is actively insulting the husband, the victim is far, far less likely to suspect the husband is writing the messages.
It solidifies the illusion of an external enemy. It makes Kristil and Daniel seem like they're on the same team, facing a common threat.
Exactly. It's high-level manipulation. But the terror campaign was most effective when it demonstrated omniscience, when the stalker knew things only an insider could possibly know.
Absolutely. The messages showed this terrifying knowledge of her mundane, private life.
The stalker knew she'd gone to the dentist on a specific day. They knew her vehicle registration stickers had expired and commented on it. They sent detailed photos of her car in public places.
This just demonstrated a pervasive surveillance, reinforcing that panopticon effect the experts later described.
She felt perpetually watched. She was destabilized, unable to figure out where her private life began and the surveillance ended.
And as the divorce got closer, the threats escalated to explicit lethal intent.
To deepen that fabricated alliance, one message explicitly framed Daniel as a co-victim. It said, "I'll get rid of him, and then we can be together."
That's the narrative he was desperate to maintain, that he was her ally, her partner, against this ghost from the past.
Until the very bitter end. But the final act of this whole digital performance was what's been called the selfie deception.
This single piece of manufactured evidence was arguably the most calculated part of the entire campaign.
It was the ultimate commitment to the narrative. The image was a photograph of Daniel arriving at his office, and it was sent to Kristil in a menacing email. The point was to prove the stalker was now following him.
To solidify their shared victimhood.
Exactly. But the digital forensics team proved this photo was not captured by some lurking outsider.
Can you walk us through how they proved it was a selfie? Because to the untrained eye, it probably just looked like a grainy photo taken from a distance.
The key was the metadata, the data about the data embedded in the image file itself. While Daniel could manipulate the timestamp of when the email was sent, he couldn't easily alter the forensic information embedded by the phone's operating system when the photo was taken.
So what did that metadata show?
Investigators found clear evidence that the photo was captured using the phone's front-facing camera, the selfie mode, and it was activated with a timer function.
Wow. So it wasn't a sudden snapshot. He had to consciously set it up.
It was a stage production. Daniel parked his car, walked to the back of the vehicle, physically propped his smartphone up, set the timer, and then walked into the frame just as the timer expired, snapping a photo of himself walking away.
The purpose wasn't just to capture the image. It was to create the digital illusion of distance and secrecy.
And that required a high degree of planning, patience, and commitment to the narrative. It utterly proves that the terror was deliberate, not impulsive.
He used his mastery of systems, his administrative precision, to physically stage a scene and then electronically transmit the lie, thinking the technical complexity would make it untraceable.
He was manufacturing evidence, piece by painstaking piece, fully believing that his technical skill would let him control both the narrative and the police investigation that he knew was coming.
The day before the murder, the calculation shifts from digital to physical planning. And this is what confirms it was premeditated. The search history recovered by investigators is it's utterly chilling.
The Google search history is a direct window into his mental state and his intent. Daniel searched, and I'm quoting here, "When is a head injury a cause for concern?"
That is not a general health query, that's tactical.
It is. It suggests he was calculating the exact level of blunt force trauma needed to incapacitate Kristil, maybe trying to gauge the force required, or the likelihood of immediate death. Or maybe a delayed incapacitation that would give him a bigger alibi window.
It is irrefutable evidence that the method of assault was planned, not spontaneous.
Absolutely. So let's use the sources to walk through the critical morning of December 14th, because the detailed reconstruction of the timeline was indispensable in dismantling his story.
Okay, lay it out for us.
The timeline is narrow, and it is utterly damning. Kristil returns home from dropping the children off at school around 7:50 a.m. The attack window is placed by investigators between 7:55 a.m. and 8:00.
Just a 5-minute window.
A 5-minute window. In that time, Daniel, who was likely waiting inside or in the garage, ambushed her the second she returned.
And the nature of the attack reveals the intent. Immediate incapacitation and silence?
Absolutely. The forensic evidence showed she sustained 2 or 3 skull fractures from a blunt object. This confirms she was struck with overwhelming force and complete surprise.
And crucially, she had virtually no defensive wounds.
No. Which means she never had a chance to react or fight back. The initial blows rendered her unconscious instantly. While she was incapacitated, Daniel rolled her over and stabbed her directly in the heart.
That dual method. Blunt force, then a direct surgical stab.
Yeah.
That's not frenzy.
No, the prosecution argued it was a deliberate act designed to ensure immediate lethality and eliminate any possibility of survival or struggle.
So once the murder was complete, the clock starts ticking, and Daniel has to execute his staging plan, which focused heavily on tampering with the digital witnesses he knew were there.
The first step was disabling immediate surveillance. At 8:15 a.m., the home security system was deactivated using Kristil's phone app. That requires insider knowledge, access to her device, or her passwords.
And then right after that, we get that single, crude piece of physical evidence that just clashes with the sophisticated digital plan.
The blue masking tape.
The blue masking tape.
Between 8:15 and 8:20 a.m., Daniel takes blue masking tape from a drawer in the kitchen and physically places it over the lens of the garage security camera.
It's a fascinating intersection of high-tech planning and low-tech execution.
Because an outside intruder wouldn't use the resident's household supplies. That simple detail links the tampering directly to the husband, the insider, who was rushing and using the quickest thing he could find to eliminate a witness.
That piece of masking tape was a physical anchor. It grounded the crime scene to the resident.
It sealed the link. Then, between 8:20 and 8:24 a.m., Daniel launches his digital misdirection campaign. Using Kristil's phone, which meant he had to wipe his own fingerprints off it afterward, he sends texts to her brother and a detective.
Claiming Kristil was having an affair.
Right. An attempt at preemptive character assassination. To explain her sudden absence and suggest she'd just run off with a lover.
A way to control the narrative of her absence.
Exactly. But forensic analysis later showed Kristil's phone usage ceased at 8:22 a.m. So the attempt to create an alibi that she was alive and communicating just fell apart instantly under scrutiny.
And at 8:24 a.m., he leaves for work, about 30 minutes later than usual.
That 30-minute delay is crucial, isn't it? It suggests the exact amount of time he needed for the staging, the cleanup, disposing of the weapons, and making sure the deception was set.
That was his window.
his critical cleanup and staging time. The sources indicate he then tried to erase his digital journey even further, deactivating his car's dash camera shortly after leaving home.
And then he drove to his office.
He drove to the CDPHE office in Glendale, arriving at 9:27 a.m., a full hour after the murder. The final act of the concerned husband performance came at precisely noon.
He calls the police.
He calls the Broomfield police for a welfare check from the safety of his office, positioning himself as the concerned, far-removed party who was initiating the discovery of the body.
Initially, Daniel's carefully constructed narrative actually worked. The police naturally focused on the red herring he created, Anthony Holland.
They had to. They were compelled to follow the digital trail Daniel had laid out. Given the explicit threats sent right up to the murder, Holland was the only logical initial suspect.
But the sophistication of the deception quickly ran up against, well, good police work and modern forensic science.
It did. What broke the Holland theory?
The alibi. It was instantaneous and irrefutable.
So investigators coordinated with law enforcement in Utah to interview Holland. And he was cooperative, he was shocked, and he could easily account for his actions. The breakthrough came from a single piece of paper.
A store receipt.
A store receipt. At 12:16 p.m., precisely when Daniel was calling in the welfare check from his office in Colorado, Anthony Holland was buying a sweatshirt at a retail store in Utah, 500 miles away.
That is the definition of a smoking gun of innocence. The receipt, complete with a timestamp, cleared him immediately.
It was decisive. And, Holland later noted that he felt Kristil's spirit played a role in him making that seemingly mundane purchase at that precise moment.
So with the manufactured suspect completely eliminated, the investigation pivots sharply back to the only person with motive, access, and sophisticated system knowledge.
Daniel Krug.
This is the moment where that term, digital DNA, really comes into play. Because Daniel was successful in cleaning up the physical scene.
Right. No recovered weapons, no blood on his person.
So the case rested entirely on the irrefutable data trail he left behind.
And the digital evidence was overwhelming because Daniel, for all his technical mastery, fundamentally misunderstood how much data modern systems retain. He thought he could outrun the metadata.
So let's start with the IP address tracing. How do they trace the origin of those terrifying emails back to his desk?
The threatening emails were sent using anonymizing services, but those services still rely on an originating IP address to connect. Forensic specialists were able to trace the IP address used to create the accounts and send the threats.
And the path didn't lead to a coffee shop or a foreign server.
It led directly to a password-protected internal network at the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment Daniel's government office.
It physically placed the genesis of the terror campaign squarely at his desk during his working hours.
So his very workplace, the symbol of his public responsibility, became the command center for his secret criminal life, a profound contradiction.
Okay, so that's the emails. What about the burner phones? He must have assumed those were untraceable.
He did. They were used for texting Kristil. And these devices, often bought with cash, are meant to be anonymous. But they found a financial thread.
A crucial one.
The devices were bought using a Visa gift card, which is a common tool for attempted anonymity. However, investigators successfully traced the gift card purchase back to Daniel Krug.
So the card, or the transaction record, was registered in a way that identified him.
Exactly. That direct financial link shattered the final vestiges of the stalker's anonymity. He used his own traceable money to buy the tools he thought would make him invisible.
That's a massive lapse for someone so calculated.
It speaks to the overconfidence of a control expert. But the most damning evidence, the evidence that truly convinced the jury, was the geolocation data.
This is where we need the technical breakdown. What does it mean for phones to be traveling in tandem in forensic terms?
Geolocation data works by tracking which cell phone towers a device pings off of as it moves. Every time a phone is active, sending a text, or just checking in with a network, it registers its approximate location with the nearest tower.
So they analyzed the data from one of the burner phones.
They did, and they found that this burner phone's location data perfectly mirrored Daniel's personal cell phone's location data.
Meaning they were never apart.
Never. Throughout the entire 6-week campaign, the two phones pinged off the same towers, traveled the same routes, and stopped at the same locations. Their home, Daniel's office, even his commute.
So the stalker wasn't 500 miles away in Utah.
The stalker was literally traveling in Daniel's pocket the entire time. The digital trail placed Daniel Krug and the manufactured threat in the exact same physical space, making it statistically impossible for them to be two different people.
And this mountain of digital evidence provided an overwhelming contrast to the lack of physical evidence.
It did. The physical void was his entire defense strategy. But the digital indelibleness was the prosecution's star witness. Daniel could dispose of a weapon, but he couldn't scrub the Google search history of his premeditation. He couldn't erase the IP logs from his work network.
And he couldn't sever that financial link to the burner devices. The digital footprint proved the plan, the execution, and the betrayal beyond a reasonable doubt. Daniel Krug was arrested quickly, just 2 days after the murder at a grocery store. He was charged with first-degree murder, stalking, and criminal impersonation. The trial, held in April 2025, became this modern case study in forensic evidence.
The prosecution, led by Senior Deputy DA Kate Armstrong, centered their entire case around digital DNA. They argued that while the defense would try to capitalize on the absence of a knife or blood evidence, the digital trail provided a narrative that was far more unique and consistent than any physical evidence could be.
They just synthesized it all. The selfie metadata proving he staged the shot, the IP logs tying the emails to his government desk,
and the geolocation data proving the stalker was his constant companion. The motive, as Prosecutor Armstrong powerfully argued to the jury, was that Daniel didn't love her. He hated her enough to manipulate their children's lives and destroy her peace.
And the defense, predictably, clung desperately to reasonable doubt based on that physical void.
They hammered the jury with the argument that, quote, there was absolutely no physical evidence, no blood found on Mr. Krug's clothing or his car. They tried to frame it as impossible for such a brutal murder to occur without leaving some physical trace.
They also tried to introduce an alternate suspect, didn't they? Pointing to the fact that partial DNA from an unknown person was found on Kristil's neck.
They did. They used that to suggest the real killer had escaped and that the police investigation was sloppy. They were just trying to cloud the issue.
But the prosecution was ready for that.
They were. Randy Pilak, the digital forensics specialist, explained to the jury precisely how the metadata proved the selfie was taken with a timer. He gave this visual, technical explanation that just neutralized the defense's attempt to dismiss the photo as inconclusive.
And Anthony Holland's testimony solidly eliminated the outside threat.
So the jury had a choice. Believe the overwhelming, mathematically consistent digital record, or believe the possibility of a phantom physical killer.
And they chose the digital record. They deliberated for only a day and a half before coming back with a swift verdict of guilty on all counts on April 17th, 2025.
The speed of that verdict really speaks volumes about the clarity of the digital evidence.
It does.
The sentencing was mandatory. Life in prison without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder. But what I find particularly important is the addition made by Judge Priscilla Lowe, a consecutive sentence of 9.5 years for the preceding psychological crime.
For the stalking and impersonation.
Right. And why is that consecutive sentence so significant?
It acknowledges that the psychological terror was its own separate crime.
Exactly. It formally designated the entire campaign as acts of domestic violence. It recognized that the psychological siege was a separate, long-term crime leading up to the murder. It ensured Daniel was punished for the months of torment, not just the minutes of violence.
And the human impact of all this calculation was just crystallized during the victim impact statements.
Lars Grimsrud, Kristil's father, gave this raw, painful statement. He described Daniel's actions as pure, selfish evil. District Attorney Brian Mason reiterated the shock, saying he would never understand how someone like Mr. Krug could brutally murder the woman that he pledged to protect.
And true to form, even after being convicted, Daniel Krug maintained this chilling denial and paranoia.
He refused to speak at the sentencing itself, but in a video call from jail, he insisted the jury got it wrong. And, disturbingly, he urged his family to get his children out of Colorado, claiming they were unsafe.
His final, desperate act of manipulation, trying to perpetuate the manufactured paranoia even as he was being sent away forever.
This case is just a profound cautionary tale about technology-facilitated coercive control. It forces us to analyze how expertise can be weaponized.
It shows us coercive control amplified exponentially. Daniel Krug used his technical and administrative skill, his knowledge of security systems, IP architecture, data management, to extend his control far beyond the physical home.
He wasn't just checking her phone. He was creating a terrifying, omnipresent digital identity. The result was that panopticon effect, where Kristil felt perpetually monitored and destabilized, never knowing what was real and what was manufactured.
And he relied entirely on that social expectation that the husband is the protector.
Exactly. He tried to use the ghost he created to force Kristil back into being dependent on him. He wanted to maintain dominance by playing the hero against his own invented villain.
But when Kristil rejected that role by filing for divorce,
the protector archetype dissolved and the executioner emerged. It fits the theory that violence is the final ultimate resource used to reassert absolute dominance when all other methods of control have failed.
so what does this all mean?
The murder of Kristil Krug wasn't an isolated act of impulsive rage. It was the terminal, violent end of a meticulously executed, months-long campaign of digital terror.
Daniel Krug, a man whose career was literally built on managing complex administrative and technical systems for the state, systematically inverted those skills and weaponized them against his most intimate partner.
The key lesson for investigations is the endurance of digital evidence. While Daniel was meticulous about physical cleanup, the digital traces, the IP logs, the gift card purchases, the selfie metadata, the Google search history, they all remained as indelible witnesses that could not be wiped away.
And Kristil's own detailed logs, which she created to save herself from a stranger, ultimately structured the narrative for the police. The digital forensics provided the hard evidence needed to convict the insider who betrayed her.
The case serves as a powerful illustration that high-level administrative or technical expertise can be just as lethal as physical strength when it's applied to coercive control. It compels us to confront the invisibility of this type of abuse.
The source material mentions that Krug managed these complex protected state data systems, BUS and CBMS, designed to safeguard citizens. The chilling realization this case leaves for you to mull or explore on your own is this. What does the specific weaponization of highly technical administrative skills designed to manage systems and protect the vulnerable against the most intimate partner, teach us about vetting trust and identifying abuse when it is hidden behind a seemingly responsible, authoritative public persona?
That high level of expertise made his abuse nearly invisible, until the digital DNA provided the undeniable truth.
The digital footprint of the victim, combined with the digital trail of the killer, proved to be the ultimate arbiters of justice here.
A deeply unsettling but critical deep dive into the modern face of control.
Thank you for listening.